In Las Vegas, a 75-year-old martial arts legend was about to face a storm he hadn't sought. What began as a celebration at the World Martial Arts Exposition turned deadly serious when Steven Seagal called out Chuck Norris as a fake fighter, igniting an arena of thousands. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical Hollywood action star. For decades, he was a 6-time undefeated world karate champion, a U.S. Air Force veteran, and the man who brought disciplined combat into mainstream America, known worldwide for his relentless precision and humility. When Steven Seagal descended from the stage, challenging him in front of the martial arts world, Seagal had no idea he was walking straight into the calm storm of a master. Norris responded not with words but with unshakable presence, triggering a clash that would redefine martial authenticity. What began as a showcase of spectacle would become a confrontation of truth. The Las Vegas Convention Center and the martial arts community it housed would never be the same after the day Seagal was smashed by the quiet power of Chuck Norris. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Las Vegas Convention Center hummed with electric anticipation. Thousands of bodies pressed against one another, a living organism of excitement pulsing through the cavernous hall. Overhead, massive banners displaying legends of martial arts swayed gently in the artificial breeze. Bruce Lee frozen mid-kick, Jackie Chan captured in a gravity-defying leap, and two men whose images hung at opposite ends of the main stage, Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed across the packed expo floor. Welcome to the 20th Annual World Martial Arts Exposition, the greatest gathering of fighters, masters, and icons in the world. The crowd erupted, waves of applause crashing through the space as spotlights swept across the sea of faces. In the front row of the VIP section, Chuck Norris sat with perfect posture, hands resting lightly on his knees. At 75, his face carried the weathered lines of decades spent in dojos, film sets, and training halls. Though older now, he maintained the build of a man half his age, the result of a lifetime of discipline that had never wavered. His eyes, clear and focused, watched the demonstrations on the main floor with quiet appreciation. 15 seats away in the same VIP section, Steven Seagal occupied his chair like a throne. His all-black outfit stretched across his substantial frame, dark-tinted glasses hiding his eyes despite the dimmed lighting. A thin smile played at the corners of his mouth as he nodded to passing admirers, his ponytail hanging perfectly still despite his movements. Unlike Norris, Seagal seemed to perform even in stillness, each gesture calculated for maximum effect. Between them sat the elite of the martial arts world champions, teachers, actors, all there to celebrate their shared passion. But the invisible current running between Seagal and Norris charged the air with something beyond festival energy. History, rivalry, opposing philosophies crystallized in human form. Jason Chen, a 22-year-old rising star in competitive karate, stood in the second tier of seating, his eyes darting between the two legends. He'd grown up with posters of both men on his bedroom walls. Now, seeing them in person for the first time, he felt the weight of their contrasting presences. "That's Seagal," whispered his training partner Miguel. "Heard he's demonstrating Aikido later." Jason nodded, but his gaze lingered on Norris. There was something about the older man's stillness that seemed more powerful than any movement. The announcer continued his bombastic introduction, voice rising with practiced showmanship. "Today we witness the meeting of old school and new spectacle, traditional values and modern innovation, the quiet masters and the new warriors." On the giant screens surrounding the arena, highlight reels began to play. Chuck Norris executing perfect roundhouse kicks, his movements economical and precise. Then Steven Seagal flipping opponents twice his size, his face never showing strain, the camera lingering on his enigmatic expressions. The crowd's reaction created a map of the divided room. Cheers erupted from some sections when Norris appeared, while others roared for Seagal's flashier techniques. "Two approaches to the martial way," the announcer continued. Chuck Norris, six-time undefeated world karate champion, whose dedication to discipline and tradition has inspired generations. The camera found Norris, who acknowledged the cheers with a modest nod. No smile, no wave, just quiet recognition. And Steven Seagal, 7th-degree black belt in Aikido, the man who brought the art of pressure points and joint manipulation to Hollywood and beyond. When the camera panned to Seagal, he rose slightly from his seat, raising one hand in a gesture that was half wave, half blessing. His smile widened as the cheers intensified from his supporters. As Norris's accomplishments continued to be listed, his schools, his charitable foundations, his role in bringing martial arts to mainstream America, the camera caught Seagal shaking his head slightly. The motion so subtle it might have been missed if not for the massive screens projecting his every movement. The gesture wasn't lost on the announcer, who thrived on tension. Seems like not everyone agrees on the path of martial arts. But that's what makes this gathering special: different styles, different philosophies, all under one roof. In the competitors section, Jason Chen leaned forward. "Did you see that? Seagal just—" "Yeah," Miguel nodded. "Disrespectful man." On the floor, demonstrations had begun. Young fighters executed flying kicks to break boards suspended in midair. Masters of various styles showcased forms that had been perfected over centuries. The atmosphere was celebratory, educational, but underneath ran the current of something building, something unscripted. Chuck Norris watched a young woman execute a perfect spinning heel kick, nodding with genuine appreciation. When she bowed to the VIP section, he returned the gesture with equal respect, regardless of her youth or status. Seagal's attention, meanwhile, seemed elsewhere. He checked his watch, leaned to whisper comments to his entourage, his focus intermittently returning to the demonstrations only when the crowd's reaction demanded it. As the afternoon presentations concluded, the announcer returned to center stage. "And now, before our evening showcase, we'll hear from some of our distinguished guests. First up, a man who revolutionized action films with his unique interpretation of Aikido, ladies and gentlemen, Steven Seagal." The spotlight found Seagal as he rose, adjusting his jacket with practiced precision. His movements toward the stage carried the same deliberate pace of his film performances: unhurried, controlled, intentional. The crowd's reaction swelled, and he seemed to absorb it, growing larger with each step. In the VIP section, Chuck Norris watched without expression, hands still resting on his knees, but his eyes never left Seagal's advancing figure. The stage lights gleamed against Seagal's dark glasses as he took the microphone, surveying the crowd like a benevolent ruler. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the same measured cadence that had become his trademark. "It's good to be among people who understand the way," he began, using the term laden with martial significance. "In my 40 years of Aikido, I've seen many who claim to follow the path of true martial arts." He paused, turning slightly toward the VIP section. "And many who became famous throwing movie punches." The air in the arena suddenly felt thinner. Hundreds of heads turned toward Chuck Norris, who hadn't moved, whose expression remained unreadable. The only indication he'd heard the comment was a slight, almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes. The expo, in that moment, became something else entirely. The storm clouds had gathered. Now they waited for lightning to strike. Steven Seagal's words hung in the air, suspended by the sudden silence that gripped the arena. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then, like a dam breaking, The reaction came gasps, murmurs, and the distinctive sound of thousands of people shifting in their seats simultaneously. The expo director, sensing danger, stepped toward the stage. But Seagal wasn't finished. He smiled, removed his dark glasses with deliberate slowness, and turned directly toward Chuck Norris. "We're here celebrating martial arts," Seagal continued, his voice carrying an edge beneath its practiced smoothness. "Real martial arts. Not choreographed kicks for cameras. Not the watered-down karate that looks good on screen but would get you killed in a real confrontation." The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Some voices rose in agreement, others in protest. The division that had simmered beneath the surface all day now boiled over. "I've trained with real masters in Japan," Seagal said, replacing his glasses. "I've felt the true power of Aikido passed down through generations. Some of us," he gestured broadly at the expo, but his meaning was clear, "learned martial arts. Others learned how to fake martial arts and get famous doing it." In the competitors section, Jason Chen felt his chest tighten. The posters on his childhood wall, Norris executing a perfect sidekick, Seagal immobilizing an attacker, suddenly seemed to represent not just different styles, but different worlds. "Is he talking about Norris?" he whispered to Miguel. "Man, who else? That's messed up," Miguel replied, shaking his head. Norris was winning tournaments when Seagal was still figuring out which end of a gi to put his head through. On the massive screen surrounding the arena, the camera found Chuck Norris. His face remained composed, eyes fixed forward, posture unchanged. But something in his stillness had shifted. It was no longer just the quiet of a disciplined man. It was the centered calm of a fighter who had faced countless opponents and knew exactly what he was capable of. The expo director finally reached the microphone. "Thank you, Stephen, for those, passionate words. Martial arts certainly inspires strong opinions." But Seagal kept his hand on the mic. "I'm not finished." His voice had dropped an octave, taking on the quiet menace that had made him millions in action films. "I just think we should be honest about who's real and who's just a fake fighter who made his name in Hollywood." The words sliced through the arena like a blade. This was no longer innuendo or veiled criticism, it was a direct challenge. The camera panned frantically between Seagal's smirking face and Norris's still form. In the center rows, a chant began low at first, then growing in strength. "Chuck. Chuck. Chuck." The announcer, sensing both danger and opportunity, leaned into the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have more than demonstrations happening today. Two legends, two philosophies." "No," Seagal interrupted, descending the stairs from the stage with unhurried confidence. "One legend and one man who throws kicks for the camera. There's a difference." The chanting grew louder, spreading through different sections of the arena. Security personnel exchanged concerned glances, but remained at their posts, uncertain how to handle conflict between two of the expo's most prominent guests. In the VIP section, several martial arts champions shifted uncomfortably. Grandmasters who had dedicated their lives to the traditions of their arts looked on with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. What should have been a celebration was transforming into something else, something raw and unscripted. Seagal continued his deliberate walk toward the VIP section, each step calculated, each movement an extension of his carefully cultivated image. "Maybe Chuck wants to show us some of those famous kicks?" he called out, loudly enough for his voice to carry without the microphone. "Show everyone what a real fighter looks like?" The crowd's energy surged, some cheering Seagal's challenge, others booing his disrespect. Camera phones rose by the hundreds, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. Chuck Norris had not moved. His hands remained on his knees, his breathing steady. But his eyes, those eyes that had stared down countless opponents in the ring long before Hollywood came calling, now fixed directly on Seagal. The young fighter, Jason, found himself holding his breath. The entire arena seemed suspended between heartbeats, waiting. "Listen to that," Seagal said, gesturing to the chanting crowd, now just steps from the VIP section. "They want to see it too. They want to see if the legend is real, or just smoke and mirrors." One of the Expo officials finally intervened, stepping between Seagal and his path to Norris. "Sir, this isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," Seagal countered, his voice carrying naturally across the now hushed arena. "It's a martial arts expo. What better place to see who's real and who's not?" The official looked desperately toward the main stage, where the director was engaged in frantic conversation with security personnel. No one had prepared for this scenario: two icons, one direct challenge, and thousands of witnesses with recording devices. In the uneasy silence that followed, Chuck Norris finally moved. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't leap to his feet or shout a response. He simply stood, a smooth, controlled motion that spoke of decades of disciplined training. At 75, he rose with the fluid grace of a man 30 years younger, his posture perfect, his balance centered. The crowd's reaction was immediate. The chanting stopped, replaced by a collective intake of breath. Everyone from the newest white belt to the most seasoned grandmaster recognized the significance of Norris's silent response. Seagal's smile widened slightly. "Well, look at that," he said, loud enough for the first few rows to hear clearly. "The legend rises." But Chuck Norris didn't speak. He simply stood, his eyes never leaving Seagal's face, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. In his stillness lay something that even the most casual observer could sense: absolute control, absolute certainty. Across the arena, thousands watched the wordless confrontation unfold. What had begun as celebration had transformed into something primal. A clash not just of men, but of philosophies. Ego versus humility. Show versus substance. And in that electric moment, with cameras flashing and breath held, the true nature of martial arts hung in the balance. The chant began somewhere in the middle rows, hesitant at first, then gaining strength as it spread through the arena like wildfire. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" Soon thousands of voices merged into a single demand, the sound reverberating off the high ceiling and polished floors of the convention center. Camera flashes strobed across the scene, capturing the moment from every angle as social media exploded with live updates from the expo. Steven Seagal stood at the edge of the VIP section, his smile fixed but eyes calculating behind dark glasses. He hadn't expected this, the raw, collective energy of the crowd focusing not on his challenge, but on Norris's response. His hand drifted to his ponytail, smoothing it in a gesture that had become habitual whenever he felt control slipping away. Chuck Norris remained standing, perfectly still amid the chaos. His weathered face betrayed nothing: no anger, no embarrassment, no eagerness to engage. Just the patient assessment of a man who had faced real battles long before cameras ever captured his image. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The expo director finally reached the announcer's microphone, his voice strained as he attempted to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen, please. This is a celebration of martial arts traditions and—" But his words disappeared beneath the continuing chant, now so loud it seemed to physically press against the walls of the arena. "Chuck! Chuck! C-H-U-C! Chuck!" In the competitors section, Jason Chen found himself on his feet, though he couldn't remember standing. The childhood posters on his bedroom wall flashed through his memory. Norris, standing victorious in a tournament decades ago. Seagal with his enigmatic half-smile executing a wrist lock. Two icons who had shaped his understanding of martial arts, now facing each other in a confrontation that transcended simple rivalry. "This is insane," Miguel whispered beside him. "Norris could have wiped the floor with Seagal 30 years ago. Now? Man, I don't know." Jason shook his head. "It's not about that," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure what it was about. Something deeper than physical ability was at stake. Something about the essence of what they all dedicated their lives to. On the main floor, Seagal began walking again, circling to approach Norris from the side rather than head-on. His movements maintained the deliberate pace that had become his trademark: unhurried, controlled, projecting absolute confidence. "The people want a demonstration," he called out, voice carrying despite the chanting. "They came to see martial arts, real martial arts." He gestured toward the open demonstration area at the center of the arena. "Why don't we give them what they paid for?" Security personnel moved toward the confrontation, but hesitated, uncertain of protocol when dealing with the expo's honored guests. The director's voice came over the speakers again, pleading for calm. But it was like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands. Then Chuck Norris moved. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply turned and began walking toward the demonstration area, each step measured, shoulders squared, eyes forward. Not rushing, not hesitating. Moving with the quiet certainty of a man who had walked this path countless times before. The crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The chanting transformed into roars of approval. Excitement building to near frenzy as Norris made his way down the short set of steps from the VIP section to the main floor. Phones recorded from every angle. The moment instantly streaming to millions across the globe. Seagal's expression flickered surprise, quickly masked by a widening smile. "En doveless. Can Heil Tardis." He hadn't expected Norris to accept the implicit challenge. Now, faced with the reality of what he had set in motion, he adjusted his jacket and followed, maintaining his characteristic unhurried pace. As Norris reached the edge of the central demonstration area, a raised platform covered in traditional tatami mats, the crowd parted before him like water. Masters who had dedicated decades to their arts bowed slightly as he passed. Young fighters who had grown up idolizing him stood speechless, witnessing living history. The announcer, sensing the inevitability of what was unfolding, recovered his professional instincts. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed across the now quieting arena. "It appears we may have an unscheduled demonstration between two of the greatest martial artists of our time." Chuck Norris stepped onto the mat, removed his shoes with practiced efficiency, and stood at the edge, a ritual of respect so deeply ingrained it transcended the circumstances. For a moment he closed his eyes, centering himself as he had before every competition, every demonstration, every film fight over the decades. When he opened them again, Seagal was approaching from the opposite side, his entourage scrambling to keep up, adjusting his collar, offering water he waved away. Unlike Norris, Seagal kept his shoes on as he stepped onto the tatami. A subtle but significant breach of traditional etiquette that did not go unnoticed by the masters present. The two men now stood at opposite edges of the demonstration area, the contrast between them starker than ever. Norris, compact, solid, still powerful in his 8th decade, radiating quiet readiness. Seagal larger, imposing, projecting theatrical confidence, his movements designed to be seen rather than felt. Between them stretched more than just 20 feet of tatami. Between them lay fundamentally different understandings of what martial arts meant, what it was for, what it should look like, how it should be lived. The crowd fell into a hushed anticipation so complete that the sound of air conditioning cycling on seemed intrusive. Camera operators for the official Expo livestream frantically adjusted their equipment, focusing on what was suddenly the most compelling martial arts event in decades. Well, Seagal finally broke the silence, his voice carrying across the mat and through the arena. It seems the legend has decided to back up his reputation. He smiled, removing his dark glasses and handing them to an assistant, then shrugging off his jacket with theatrical flair. Should I take it easy on you, Chuck? Out of respect for your advanced years? The disrespect in the question hung in the air like smoke. Through the crowd ran a current of unease. This had gone beyond showmanship into something ugly. Even Seagal's most devoted fans shifted uncomfortably. Chuck Norris didn't react to the taunt. He simply stood, hands relaxed at his sides, weight perfectly distributed in the stance that had become second nature through tens of thousands of hours of practice. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried with surprising clarity. "You wanted to see who's real," he said. The words simple, direct, without dramatic inflection. "So let's see." Something in his tone, the absolute absence of doubt, of concern, of uncertainty, sent a ripple through the arena. Even Seagal's practiced composure seemed to waver for a split second before his smile returned, wider but somehow less convincing. In the competitors section, Jason Chen felt a chill run through him despite the arena's warmth. He had studied both men's techniques, watched their films, read their books, but now he understood he was about to witness something beyond technique, a confrontation between two fundamentally different approaches to the martial way. "Center mat," called the announcer, who had appointed himself referee for the unplanned event. "Bow to each other, please." Norris moved to the center with fluid economy. No wasted motion, no theatrical gestures. At the proper distance, he stopped and executed a formal bow, perfect in angle and timing. The movement infused with the respect for tradition that had guided his entire career. Seagal approached with his characteristic swagger, stopping an arm's length from Norris. His bow was shallow, perfunctory, his eyes never leaving Norris's face, another subtle break with protocol that spoke volumes. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice trembled slightly with the weight of the moment. "What we are about to witness is completely unplanned and—" "Enough talk!" Seagal interrupted. Settling into his stance, hands raised in the open palm position characteristic of Aikido. "Let's see what the legend is made of." Across the mat, Chuck Norris said nothing. He simply adjusted his stance, slightly balanced, rooted, prepared. His eyes, clear and focused, revealed nothing of his thoughts. But in the tension-filled arena, as two martial arts icons faced each other for the first time, one truth became crystal clear to everyone watching. Words were over. Action was about to speak. The demonstration area had transformed. No longer simply a mat for scheduled performances, it had become an arena where something primal was about to unfold. The bright overhead lights seemed to intensify, focusing on the two men at the center of not just the room, but the entire martial arts world. Steven Seagal circled slowly, hands open in the characteristic Aikido position. His movements deliberately expansive, playing to the crowd even in this tense prelude. His expression remained supremely confident, but those closest to the mat noticed a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Anytime you're ready, Chuck," he called, the words carrying across the hushed arena. "Or do you need a stunt double like in your movies?" The taunt hung in the air, met only by Chuck Norris's steady gaze. The older fighter had shifted almost imperceptibly into his fighting stance, a blend of traditional karate and the innovations he had developed through decades of cross-training. Nothing flashy, nothing exaggerated, just efficient readiness. "This is unprecedented," the announcer whispered into his microphone, voice pitched low, as if commenting on a golf tournament. Two legends. Two distinct styles. Seagal's Aikido focused on redirecting an opponent's energy against Norris's traditional karate, known for explosive power. The contrast between the two men was stark and revealing. Seagal, at 69, still cut and imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, his movements deliberately theatrical. Norris, at 75, appeared more compact, his presence defined not by physical size, but by the centered calm that radiated from his perfectly balanced stance. On the edge of the mat, Expo officials conferred anxiously. This unscheduled confrontation carried enormous liability risks, but attempting to stop it now would only create greater chaos. Security staff stood ready, but uncertain how does one intervene between two martial arts icons without becoming part of the story. "I've never seen anything like this," whispered a veteran tournament referee to the Expo director. "We should stop it before." "Would you want to be the one to step between them right now?" the director responded, gesturing to the electric atmosphere in the arena. "Besides, they're both professionals. They know what they're doing." But the uncertainty in his voice betrayed his concern. This wasn't a choreographed demonstration or a controlled sparring match. This was something raw, unscripted, a collision of egos and philosophies that had been building for decades. In the competitors section, Jason Chen leaned forward so far he was barely on his seat. "Look at Norris's eyes," he whispered to Miguel. "He's not even blinking." Indeed, Chuck Norris's focus was absolute, the kind of presence that comes not from temporary concentration, but from decades of disciplined practice. His breathing remained deep and regular, his stance solid but not rigid, his awareness seemingly extended to every corner of the mat. "It's like watching two different species," Miguel replied. "Seagulls all show, all the time. Norris just is." The observation spread through their section. Young fighters who had grown up studying both men's techniques, now witnessing the profound difference between them in person. Not just in physical approach, but in fundamental understanding of what martial arts represented. Seagal continued circling, his movements becoming more pronounced. "I've trained with real masters in Japan," he called out, loudly enough for his voice to carry beyond the first few rows. "Not in Hollywood studios with choreographers." The comment drew scattered cheers from his supporters. But most of the crowd remained silent, witnessing something that transcended simple rivalry. This was a collision of philosophies, a public reckoning between different understandings of what martial arts meant. From the VIP section, several grandmasters watched with expressions ranging from disapproval to fascination. An elderly Japanese Aikido master shook his head slightly. "This is not the way," he murmured to his senior student. "True Aikido never seeks confrontation." Nearby, a Korean Taekwondo grandmaster nodded in agreement. "But once confrontation comes to you, how you respond reveals everything." Between them, the philosophical divide at the heart of martial arts itself. The balance between seeking peace and being prepared for conflict. On the mat, the tension continued building. Norris remained centered, turning only enough to keep Seagal in his field of vision. His economy of movement stood in stark contrast to Seagal's theatrical circling. Where one performed, the other simply was. The thousands of spectators had fallen into a silence so complete that the sound of air conditioning cycling on seemed intrusive. Camera phones recorded from every angle, live streams beaming this unexpected confrontation to millions across the globe. In the official broadcast booth, commentators struggled to provide context for what was unfolding. "For those just joining us," one whispered, aware that his voice might carry to the mat, "we're witnessing an unscheduled encounter between Steven Seagal and Chuck Norris." This follows Seagal's earlier comments questioning Norris's authenticity as a martial artist. His co-commentator shook his head in disbelief. "I've been covering martial arts for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Two icons, two entirely different approaches to the art. Are we going to fight or dance?" Seagal finally demanded, stopping his circular movement and settling into his stance more firmly. "The legend of Chuck Norris, let's see if it's real." The challenge hung in the air, charged with decades of unspoken rivalry. To the martial arts world, these men represented fundamentally different paths. One had built his reputation on tournament victories before transitioning to film, his techniques rooted in demonstrable skill. The other had constructed a mystique around theatrical techniques that looked impressive, but had rarely been tested outside controlled environments. Now, that long simmering contrast was about to find resolution. Without warning, Seagal lunged forward, not with a strike, but with the sweeping, circular grab characteristic of Aikido, designed to capture Norris's wrist and use his own energy against him. The movement was executed with the speed and commitment that had made Seagal famous, his larger frame surging across the space between them with surprising quickness. But Norris wasn't there. With a subtle shift, a movement so economical it was nearly invisible, he had adjusted his position just enough for Seagal's grabbing hand to miss its target. No dramatic evasion, no flashy counter, just the precise calibration of distance that comes from thousands of hours of real combat experience. Seagal's momentum carried him slightly past his intended target. He recovered quickly, turning to face Norris again. But something had changed. The miss, small as it was, had disrupted his theatrical confidence. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "Remarkable defensive awareness from Norris," the announcer whispered. "Caught up in the moment despite himself. Minimal movement, maximum effect." In the front rows, martial arts instructors leaned forward, recognizing the technical excellence they had just witnessed. This wasn't the exaggerated evasion seen in films, but the real-world application of principle using the absolute minimum movement necessary to achieve the desired result. "That's it," murmured a veteran karate sensei to his wide-eyed students. "That's what we mean by economy of motion. Not a millimeter more than needed." The crowd stirred, sensing the shift in energy. This wasn't going according to Seagal's script. The easy victory he had perhaps imagined, the younger, larger man overwhelming the aging legend, was already evaporating. Seagal reset, adjusting his gi with a sharp tug, his smile tightening. "Just warming up, Chuck," he called. But his voice had lost some of its earlier bombast. He circled again, this time more cautiously, seeking an angle of approach. Norris remained centered, his position adjusted by mere inches, nothing wasted. His eyes never left Seagal's core, focusing not on hands or feet, but on the center of mass where all movement originates. In the competitors section, Jason Chen watched with growing realization. "He's reading Seagal's intention before he even moves," he whispered to Miguel. "That's beyond technique. That's something else." Miguel nodded, understanding immediately. Experience. Real experience. Not just demonstrations or movie sets, but thousands of actual encounters where consequences were real. Around them, other young fighters nodded in recognition. They were witnessing something beyond the physical techniques they drilled daily, the almost mystical awareness that comes only after decades of authentic practice. In the silence that followed, the fundamentally different approaches to martial arts became visible to everyone watching. One man moved constantly, creating a show of readiness. The other remained still, embodying readiness in its purest form. The distinction wasn't lost on the masters present. An elderly Chinese Wing Chun Sifu nodded slightly, recognizing the principle his system had always emphasized. Centerline control, economy of movement, the effectiveness of stillness against excessive motion. The young bull runs around the field showing his strength, he murmured to his assistant. The old bull simply walks to where the cows are. The observation, though quiet, captured perfectly what was unfolding before them. Seagal attacked again, this time with a combination. A sweeping block followed by his signature wrist grab, executed with speed that belied his size. Again, Norris's response was minimal but perfect. A slight shift of weight, a nearly imperceptible adjustment of angle that caused Seagal's grabbing hand to close on empty air. But this time, as Seagal's momentum carried him forward, Norris countered not with a dramatic strike, but with a simple, direct palm heel that connected solidly with Seagal's chest. The impact wasn't theatrical, but it was undeniably effective. Seagal stumbled back several steps, surprise evident on his face. The crowd erupted not in bloodthirsty cheers, but in the appreciative response of those who understand technique. They had just witnessed a perfect example of fighting economy. Minimal effort, maximum result. "Did you see that?" the announcer whispered. Professional detachment momentarily forgotten. Textbook application of principle using the opponent's own momentum, adding just enough force at precisely the right angle. In the VIP section, the gathered masters exchanged knowing glances. This wasn't entertainment, it was education, a demonstration not of how martial arts looks, but of how it works when stripped to its essential truth. "Old man's got some power left," Seagal said, but the theatrical confidence in his voice had hollowed. He adjusted his stance, recognition dawning that this would not be the easy victory he had imagined. Across the mat, Chuck Norris hadn't moved after his counter. No triumphant gesture, no playing to the crowd. He simply reset to his original position, centered and ready. His breathing remained deep and regular, his focus unwavering. Something was becoming clear to everyone in the arena. This was not a battle between equals. This was a master class in the difference between appearance and substance. For decades, the martial arts world had debated the effectiveness of different styles, the validity of various approaches. But what they were witnessing transcended style. This wasn't Aikido versus karate. This was performance versus function, appearance versus essence. Seagal lunged again, this time abandoning some of his Aikido principles for a more direct attack, a sweeping palm strike aimed at Norris's head. The movement was fast, committed, dangerous. Many in the crowd gasped, suddenly aware that this demonstration had edges of real intent. Norris's response seemed to unfold in slow motion, though it happened in fractions of a second. A slight duck, a pivot of the front foot, and a counter that connected with Seagal's extended arm not with crushing force, but with precise timing that disrupted his balance and sent him stumbling to the side. Again, no follow-up, no pressing of advantage. Norris simply reset, his position adjusted by mere inches. Ready, but not aggressive. The pattern repeated twice more, Seagal attacking with increasing commitment but decreasing form. Norris responding with minimal, precise movements that consistently placed him in advantageous positions. No wasted energy, no theatrical counters. Just the pure efficiency that comes from real combat experience. With each exchange, the difference between the two men became more pronounced. One fighting for his image, his reputation, his ego. The other simply expressing decades of disciplined practice. In the tiered seating, Jason Chen felt a shift in his understanding of what he had dedicated his life to pursuing. The movie posters on his bedroom wall, Norris executing perfect kicks, Seagal with his enigmatic smile immobilizing attackers, would never look the same after today. What he had admired as a child, he now recognized as fundamentally different approaches, not just to fighting, but to life itself. It's like watching someone who plays a doctor on TV face off against an actual surgeon, Miguel observed quietly. One knows the lines and looks the part. The other has done thousands of actual operations. The analogy spread through their section, young fighters nodding in recognition. What they were witnessing wasn't just a physical confrontation, but the stripping away of illusion to reveal underlying truth. After the fifth exchange, in which Norris had executed a simple but devastating sweep that put Seagal momentarily on the mat, the larger man rose with visible frustration. His carefully maintained composure had cracked. His gi was disheveled, his breathing heavy, his movements losing the calculated smoothness that had been his trademark. "Enough playing around," he muttered, loud enough for the first few rows to hear. Something shifted in his stance, a hardening, an abandonment of pretense. His next attack wouldn't be for show, it would be with genuine intent. The crowd sensed it too. The atmosphere tightened, excitement giving way to tension. This had moved beyond demonstration into something rawer, more dangerous. In the front row, security personnel exchanged concerned glances, uncertain whether to intervene. This wasn't in the expo program, wasn't covered by waivers or insurance policies. But at the same time, stopping it now seemed both impossible and inappropriate, like interrupting a rare natural phenomenon. "Should we step in?" one whispered to the head of security. The security chief shook his head slightly. "They're both professionals. Let them finish what they started." But his hand remained on his radio, ready to call for assistance if the situation escalated beyond acceptable boundaries. In the competitors section, Jason Chen held his breath. What had begun as an unlikely confrontation between icons now teetered on the edge of something that could redefine both men's legacies. Seagal gathered himself, focus narrowing, the theatrical elements falling away. For perhaps the first time since he had taken the microphone, he was fully present as a martial artist rather than a persona. Across the mat, Chuck Norris noted the change with calm awareness. His expression revealed nothing, but his stance adjusted slightly. A subtle shift that only the most experienced fighters would recognize as preparation for serious engagement. The arena fell silent. Thousands of spectators collectively holding their breath. What happened next would be spoken about in dojos and training halls for decades to come. Seagal exploded forward with genuine speed and power. No showmanship now. Just committed attack. His strike was direct, powerful, aimed with real intent at Norris's head. What followed happened so quickly that many would later debate exactly what they had seen. Norris moved not back or away, but forward, into the attack. There was a moment of contact, a shifting of balance, a subtle redirection of energy. No dramatic technique, no showy counter, just the perfect application of principle. And then, Steven Seagal was on the mat, looking up at lights. His attack neutralized so efficiently that it seemed to have defeated itself. The crowd's reaction was not immediate. For 2 heartbeats, stunned silence held the arena. Then it came, not wild cheering, but the deeper, more profound response of witnessing mastery. Applause built, spreading across the thousands gathered, unified in recognition of what they had just seen. Chuck Norris stood at the center of the mat. His position barely changed from where he had begun. No celebration, no posturing. After ensuring Seagal was unhurt, he simply bowed to his opponent, to the mat, to the tradition that had shaped his life. In that moment, no further demonstration was needed. The question Seagal had raised, who was real and who wasn't, had been answered not with words, but with irrefutable action. And as Norris straightened from his bow, the respect in the arena was palpable, not just for his victory, but for what that victory represented. The triumph of substance over appearance, of discipline over display, of being over seeming. The true essence of martial arts, demonstrated when it mattered most. Steven Seagal rose slowly from the mat, adjusting his gi with hands that betrayed a slight tremor. The fall had been clean, no injury, no damage beyond the unmistakable message it had delivered. His eyes, previously hidden behind practiced confidence, now revealed naked calculation as he reassessed the man standing calmly before him. The arena remained hushed, collective breath held as the confrontation entered uncharted territory. What had begun as Seagal's theatrical challenge had transformed into something none had anticipated, least of all Seagal himself. The script he had imagined was in tatters, forcing him to write a new one in real time, under the gaze of thousands. "Lucky counter," he said, voice pitched to carry beyond the first rows. But the words rang hollow, contradicted by what everyone had witnessed, not luck, but the perfect synchronization of timing, distance, and technique that comes only from decades of authentic practice. Chuck Norris did not respond to the verbal jab. He simply reset his position, centered and balanced, his focus unwavering. At 75, his movements carried the fluid precision that most fighters never achieve, even in their prime, each shift of weight, each adjustment of stance revealing the thousands of hours invested in perfecting fundamentals. In the competitors section, Jason Chen leaned toward Miguel, voice hushed with realization. "Norris isn't fighting Seagal," he whispered. "He's teaching him." The observation spread through their section, heads nodding in understanding. What they were witnessing wasn't a battle for dominance, but a masterclass in the difference between appearance and substance. Seagal circled again, but his movement had changed the theatrical swagger, replaced by genuine caution. The transformation was telling. The performer had given way to the actual martial artist underneath, now fully aware of the reality he faced. "Anytime you're ready," he called, attempting to reclaim the initiative, both physical and psychological. Or is one technique all the legend has left? Norris remained still, hands relaxed at his sides, weight distributed perfectly between his feet. His breathing stayed measured and deep, his eyes never leaving Seagal's center mass. The silence in his response spoke volumes, a lifetime spent letting actions answer challenges. Seagal's frustration visibly mounted. The narrative he had constructed, the younger, more dynamic fighter, exposing the aging legend, had crumbled with that first clean throw. Now he faced a choice. Retreat with dignity, partially intact, or escalate, and risk further exposure. Pride chose for him. He surged forward suddenly, abandoning the circular movements of Aikido for a direct attack. A straight punch, followed by a hooking grab, executed with genuine speed and commitment. The move carried real intent, the theatrical elements stripped away by wounded ego. This time, Norris moved to meet him. The exchange that followed happened so quickly that many in the audience would later disagree about exactly what they had seen. Norris slipped the punch with minimal movement, intercepted the grab with perfect timing, and executed a simple but devastating counter that once again put Seagal on the defensive. No wasted motion, no flashy technique, just the pure efficiency that comes from thousands of hours of real application. "Textbook perfection," gasped the announcer. Professionalism momentarily forgotten in the face of undeniable mastery. Economy of motion that defines true martial arts excellence. Seagal recovered his balance, but something had changed in his demeanor. The practiced confidence had given way to something rawer, a mixture of frustration and dawning realization. He was not facing a legend trading on past glory. He was facing a master whose skills had been refined rather than diminished by time. "Come on!" he shouted, abandoning pretense entirely. "Fight me for real!" The demand hung in the air, revealing more about the speaker than its target. In that moment, Everyone present understood the fundamental difference between the two men. One needed to prove something. The other had nothing to prove. From the second tier of seating, a veteran martial arts instructor leaned toward his students. "Watch Norris's feet," he whispered urgently. "See how little they move. Everything starts from the ground." The students nodded, eyes wide, witnessing a demonstration more valuable than any seminar they had paid for. This wasn't choreographed excellence. This was martial arts stripped to its essential truth: efficiency over flash, substance over appearance. In the front row, several martial arts film directors exchanged knowing glances. What they were witnessing wouldn't translate to cinema: too subtle, too precise, lacking the exaggerated movements that read well on camera. But it was, undeniably, the authentic source from which all their stylized interpretations derived. Seagal reset his position. Perspiration now visible on his forehead, despite the arena's climate control. His breathing had quickened, not from physical exertion, but from the psychological weight of the moment. For decades, his carefully constructed persona had remained unchallenged in controlled environments. Now, under the unforgiving lights of genuine confrontation, that persona was cracking. "Is that all you've got, Chuck?" he called, the words carrying a desperate edge beneath their bravado. "I thought the legend had more." Norris adjusted his stance slightly, the movement so subtle that only the most experienced fighters present could recognize its significance. He was not preparing to retreat or defend. He was preparing to end the confrontation. In the competitors section, Jason Chen held his breath. Though only 22, he had trained in martial arts since childhood, his body carrying the imprint of thousands of repetitions. Something in Norris's subtle shift registered in his own muscles, the physical recognition of perfect positioning that transcends intellectual understanding. "He's going to finish it," Jason whispered, the words barely audible even to Miguel beside him. Across the arena, a similar recognition rippled through those with enough experience to read the language of body mechanics. Masters who had dedicated decades to their art straightened in their seats, attention sharpening. This was about to become a moment referenced in dojos and training halls for generations. Seagal attacked again, a combination of strikes and grappling techniques executed with the full commitment of a man desperate to salvage his reputation. The movements carried genuine skill, a reminder that beneath the Hollywood persona lay a martial artist of considerable ability. His first strike, a sweeping open-hand technique, aimed at Norris's neck, cut through empty air, as the older fighter shifted just enough to let it pass. His follow-up grab, targeting Norris's gi, caught only fabric as Norris executed a subtle body turn that maintained perfect distance. For a moment, they were chest to chest, Seagal's momentum carrying him forward, Norris's economy of movement creating the illusion of stillness despite his precise positioning. Those in the front rows could see their eyes meet Seagal's wide with the dawning recognition of what was coming. Norris's clear and focused, containing neither anger nor triumph, only absolute presence. The counter happened in 3 distinct movements that blended into a single flowing technique. Norris's left hand redirected Seagal's extended arm, not with force, but with precise timing that used Seagal's own momentum. His right hand established control at Seagal's elbow, creating a subtle fulcrum, and his weight shifted just 2 inches. But at exactly the right moment, transforming his body from barrier to channel, through which Seagal's energy was directed. To those watching, it appeared almost gentle, as if Seagal had simply lost his balance and Norris had guided his fall. But the martial artists present recognized the mastery in that gentleness. The greatest skill isn't in applying maximum force, but in applying precisely the right force at precisely the right moment. Seagal hit the mat with a solid impact, not enough to injure, but enough to leave no doubt about what had happened. For the second time in less than 5 minutes, he found himself looking up at the arena lights, the wind partially knocked from his lungs, his carefully constructed narrative in shambles. The crowd's reaction was not immediate. For 3 heartbeats, stunned silence held the arena as the collective mind processed what it had witnessed. Then, like a wave building from deep water, the response came, not wild cheering or bloodthirsty excitement, but the deeper, more profound applause of recognition. This wasn't entertainment, it was education. "That's ukemiwaza perfected," murmured a Japanese master in the third row, using the term for the art of receiving technique, the ability to control an opponent's balance with minimal force. Something you feel once and spend a lifetime trying to replicate. Nearby, younger fighters nodded, understanding they had just witnessed something that couldn't be taught through words or demonstrations, only recognized through experience. Chuck Norris stood near the fallen Seagal, balanced and centered, no triumph in his expression. After ensuring his opponent was unhurt, he simply extended his hand in offer of respect despite everything that had transpired. In that suspended moment, with thousands watching, Seagal faced perhaps the most difficult choice of his public life: accept the hand and acknowledge what had happened, or reject it and confirm what many had begun to suspect about the man behind the image. The significance of the gesture wasn't lost on anyone present. This wasn't just about physical technique, it was about the character that martial arts is meant to develop. Humility in victory, dignity in defeat, respect transcending ego. Seconds stretched, heavy with significance. Then, with visible reluctance, Seagal took the offered hand and allowed himself to be helped to his feet. The moment their hands clasped, something shifted in the atmosphere. A silent acknowledgement passed between them that went beyond the physical confrontation. 2 men who had chosen different paths in expressing their martial arts, whose philosophies and approaches had diverged decades ago, finding a moment of genuine connection through the shared language of technique and respect. No words were exchanged between them. None were needed. The question Seagal had raised, who was real and who wasn't, had been answered not through words but through irrefutable action. As Seagal regained his footing, a complex mixture of emotions played across his face: frustration, resignation, and perhaps most surprisingly, a flicker of relief. The burden of maintaining an unassailable image, of living within the constraints of a carefully constructed persona, had momentarily lifted. In defeat, paradoxically, he had found a kind of freedom. The crowd's response began as a murmur, then swelled into applause, not the frenzied cheering of a spectacle, but the deeper, more resonant recognition of witnessing something authentic. Masters nodded in silent acknowledgement. Young fighters watched with wide eyes, understanding they had just received a lesson more valuable than any scheduled demonstration. In the competitors section, Jason Chen felt something shift in his understanding of what he had dedicated his life to pursuing. The posters on his bedroom wall, Norris in his fighting stance, Seagal with his enigmatic smile, would never look the same again. "That," he whispered to Miguel, "is what it's all about. Not the moves. The man behind them." Miguel nodded, his usual banter silenced by the weight of what they had witnessed. "It's like watching the difference between someone who plays a doctor in a TV show and a surgeon who's done thousands of operations," he said finally. "One looks the part. The other is the part." The observation rippled through their section. Young fighters at the beginning of their journey, suddenly granted a clear vision of its destination. Not fame or technical flash, but the integration of technique and character so complete that one becomes indistinguishable from the other. As the applause continued, Chuck Norris bowed formally first to Seagal, then to the mat itself, honoring the space where martial arts had been practiced. The gesture carried the weight of decades spent respecting the traditions that had shaped him. Seagal, after a moment's hesitation, returned the bow shallower, less practiced, but genuine in a way his earlier theatrical gestures had not been. Something had been stripped away in those brief exchanges on the mat, revealing glimpses of the actual martial artist beneath the carefully constructed persona. The announcer, sensing the historic significance of what had transpired, spoke into his microphone with uncharacteristic restraint. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just witnessed something extraordinary. A demonstration of martial arts in its purest form. Please show your appreciation for both of these legendary figures." The applause intensified, but Chuck Norris was already moving toward the edge of the mat. No victory lap, no playing to the crowd. His purpose fulfilled. He was simply ready to return to his seat with the same quiet dignity with which he had left it. Seagal remained at the center a moment longer, adjusting his gi, gathering himself. When he finally moved to exit the mat, his swagger was noticeably diminished, his theatrical presence toned down by the reality he had encountered. As the two men left the demonstration area by different paths, the contrast between them had never been clearer. One had entered to prove something, and left having learned something. The other had entered simply to answer a challenge, and left having taught something. And everyone present understood that they had witnessed not just a physical confrontation, but a profound demonstration of what martial arts, at its core, truly represented. The triumph of substance over spectacle, of discipline over display, of being over seeming. In that moment, as the scheduled demonstrations resumed and the expo continued its programmed flow, something had fundamentally shifted in the arena's atmosphere. The martial arts world had been granted a rare, unfiltered glimpse of its own essence, not through words or philosophy, but through the undeniable evidence of action. The lesson would linger long after the applause faded. The Las Vegas Convention Center hummed with subdued energy as the Martial Arts Expo continued into its evening session. On the surface, demonstrations resumed their scheduled progression. Vendors continued their sales pitches, and fans moved between exhibits with programs in hand. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, something fundamental had shifted. Conversations in every corner of the massive hall centered on what witnesses had taken to calling the confrontation, already acquiring the capital letter of significant history. Cell phone videos circulated, social media exploded with first-hand accounts, and martial arts forums crashed under the traffic surge as the world reacted to what had transpired between two icons of the fighting arts. "Did you see how little Norris moved?" A young black belt asked his training partners, gesturing with his hands to demonstrate. "I mean, Seagal came in with this big sweeping grab, and Norris just shifted. Just this much." He indicated a distance of barely 2 inches between his thumb and forefinger. His companions nodded, replaying the footage on their phones for the dozenth time, studying each frame with the intensity of scholars examining a rare manuscript. This wasn't entertainment to them. It was education, a glimpse into the reality behind the myths they had grown up with. Nearby, 2 veteran instructors conferred in hushed tones, their decades of experience lending weight to their analysis. "That counter to the front kick," the older one murmured. "I've been teaching that principle for 30 years, but I've never seen it executed with such purity." His colleague nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. No excess. Nothing added for appearance. Just the essential truth of the technique. He shook his head slightly. A gesture of reverence rather than disagreement. That's what happens when someone spends 50 years refining instead of performing. In the VIP section, Chuck Norris had returned to his seat with the same quiet composure he had displayed throughout the encounter. If the events of the past hour had affected him, it wasn't visible in his demeanor. He watched the ongoing demonstrations with attentive respect, applauding young practitioners' efforts with the same sincerity he had shown before the confrontation. Several seats away, a film director who had worked with both men leaned toward a producer. "You couldn't script what we just saw," he said, voice pitched low to avoid being overheard. And if you did, no one would believe it. The producer nodded, understanding the subtext. What they had witnessed couldn't be captured on film, couldn't be choreographed or rehearsed. It was the unfiltered expression of decades spent in genuine practice rather than performance. The difference between appearing to be something and actually being it. Steven Seagal's seat, however, remained conspicuously empty. Backstage, in a private room reserved for featured guests, Seagal sat alone. His entourage hovered anxiously outside, unsure how to approach a situation for which there was no prepared protocol. Inside, Seagal stared at his reflection in a wall-mounted mirror, seeing himself perhaps more clearly than he had in decades. The carefully constructed image, the enigmatic smile, the measured movements, the unflappable confidence had been built over years of controlled environments. Movie sets, where retakes were possible, demonstrations with compliant partners, interviews with deferential hosts. Today, that image had collided with something his carefully managed life rarely encountered: unscripted reality. He touched his shoulder where Norris's counter had connected not with excessive force, but with the precise pressure needed to make its point. No permanent damage, no injury to anything except the persona he had spent a lifetime crafting. Behind him, the door opened quietly, without a knock. In the mirror's reflection, he saw the expo director enter, expression a careful mask of professional concern. "Mr. Seagal," the director began, his tone walking the delicate line between deference and authority. "The closing ceremony is scheduled to begin in 45 minutes. Your participation would be—" "I'm not going out there," Seagal interrupted, his voice lacking its usual theatrical depth. "Make my apologies." The director hesitated, weighing his response. "Sir, your absence would be noted after what happened." Seagal turned from the mirror, his expression uncharacteristically raw. "After what happened? You think I want to sit on a stage and pretend nothing changed?" A bitter laugh escaped him. "That's exactly what everyone expects, isn't it? The show must go on. The image must be maintained." The director shifted uncomfortably, unprepared for this break from Seagal's usual carefully managed persona. Before he could respond, another knock sounded at the door. This time, Jason Chen, the young fighter from the competitors section, stood in the doorway, hesitating at the threshold. The director looked relieved at the interruption, nodding to Seagal before slipping past Jason and out the door. "Mr. Seagal?" Jason's voice carried equal measures of uncertainty and determination. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Seagal's first instinct was to dismiss the intrusion, to retreat behind the wall of celebrity inaccessibility that had protected him for years. But something in the young man's expression, earnest, questioning, seeking, gave him pause. "Come in," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Close the door." Jason entered, bowing slightly from ingrained habit. Before taking the seat, Seagal indicated, "I've studied your films since I was 10. Jason began, words tumbling out with the urgency of things long considered but never expressed. "I had your poster next to Norris on my wall. But today—" He paused, struggling to articulate the transformation he had witnessed. "Today I saw something I don't understand." Seagal looked at the young fighter. Really looked at him, perhaps seeing him as a person rather than an audience for the first time. "What don't you understand? Why challenge him like that? In public? In front of everyone? What were you trying to prove?" The directness of the question might once have triggered dismissal or a practiced philosophical deflection. Instead, Seagal found himself considering it genuinely, peeling back layers of motivation he rarely examined. "I've spent my life being compared to him," he said finally, the words emerging without their usual calculated quality. Chuck Norris, the real deal. The tournament champion who became a star. While I was, he gestured vaguely at himself. The one who talked a good game. The one who might be faking it. Jason listened intently, nodding not in agreement, but in recognition of the human vulnerability behind the admission. So, today was about proving them wrong? He asked. Today was about proving me right, Seagal corrected. The honesty surprising even himself. About confirming what I've been telling myself for decades. He laughed softly, the sound carrying no humor. Didn't work out that way. On the main expo floor, Chuck Norris was approached by the event director, who leaned down to whisper in his ear. Norris listened, nodded once, and rose from his seat with the same quiet efficiency that characterized all his movements. Those nearby noticed his departure but, respectful of what they had witnessed earlier, created space rather than seeking attention or photographs. Norris made his way through the back corridors of the convention center, acknowledging staff with nods, but maintaining his purposeful pace. When he reached the door where Seagal had retreated, he paused, taking a moment to center himself before knocking. Inside, Seagal and Jason looked up at the sound. Something in Seagal's expression tightened a return of the defensive mask that had slipped during their conversation. "Come in," he called, his voice regaining some of its performative quality. The door opened to reveal Chuck Norris, standing with the same balanced presence he had maintained throughout the confrontation. His eyes took in the scene: Seagal seated before the mirror, the young fighter leaning forward intently, and he nodded in acknowledgement to both. "The director thought we should talk," he said, his voice carrying the straightforward quality that had made him relatable to millions despite his legendary status. "Mind if I join you?" Jason started to rise, eager to give the icons privacy, but Norris gestured for him to remain seated. "Stay. Sometimes the next generation needs to hear what the previous ones learned the hard way." Seagal's expression cycled through visible conflict, pride warring with the reality he had confronted on the mat. Finally, he gestured to an empty chair. "Might as well finish what we started." Norris took the offered seat, his movements economical and precise even in this simple action. For a moment, silence filled the room, not uncomfortable, but weighted with the significance of the three martial artists from different generations sharing this unscripted moment. "I owe you an apology," Seagal said finally, the words clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. "What I said out there was unnecessary." Norris considered this, then shook his head slightly. "Not to me, you don't. I've been in this game long enough to let words roll off my back." He glanced at Jason. "But maybe to him, and the others like him who look to us. We have responsibilities beyond ourselves." The observation hung in the air. Simple, but profound. "Why didn't you embarrass me out there?" Seagal asked, the question emerging from a place of genuine confusion. "You could have. Easily." Norris smiled slightly, the expression reaching his eyes in a way that transformed his weathered face. "That's not what martial arts is about. Never has been." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, speaking not as an icon but as one practitioner to another. "It's not about destroying opponents. It's about mastering yourself." Jason listened, absorbing the exchange with the intensity of someone witnessing something precious and rare. "I spent 50 years training," Norris continued. "Not to beat others, but to become better than I was yesterday. The tournaments, the films, the recognition, those were just side effects." He looked directly at Seagal. "I think you know that too, somewhere beneath all the—" He gestured vaguely, encompassing Seagal's carefully constructed persona. Seagal held his gaze for a long moment, then looked away, the gesture an admission in itself. "It gets away from you," he said quietly. The image. The expectations. After a while, you're not sure where the real you ends and the performance begins. Norris nodded, understanding evident in his expression. Fame does that. Turns you into what people want rather than who you are. He glanced at Jason, including him in the conversation. That's why the training never stops. It's the anchor to what's real. Jason absorbed this, recognition dawning in his expression. So when you're on the mat, that's the only place where the truth can't be faked, Norris finished. Either you can or you can't. Either it works or it doesn't. He smiled slightly. No second takes. No editing. Just the moment and how you meet it. Seagal nodded, a gesture of recognition rather than agreement. My first teacher in Japan used to say something similar. On the mat, all men are equal. Only their training speaks. Wise teacher, Norris acknowledged. I stopped listening somewhere along the way. Seagal admitted. The movies. The fame. It became easier to play the part than to live it. The confession hung in the air, startling in its honesty. Particularly from a man whose career had been built on careful image management. Outside the private room, the expo continued demonstrations, autograph sessions, merchandise sales, all proceeding as scheduled. But throughout the massive hall, conversations focused on what had transpired between the two icons. Video clips circulated on phones, shared with those who hadn't witnessed the confrontation firsthand. Social media exploded with posts, most carrying the same essential message. Respect is earned through actions, not claims. True strength requires no announcement. In the competitors section, Miguel refreshed his phone constantly, scanning for updates. No statement from either camp yet, he told his teammates. But check out this clip someone posted from the third row. You can see exactly how Norris timed that counter. The young fighters huddled around the screen, studying the footage with the intensity of students receiving a master class. What they had witnessed wasn't just a confrontation between celebrities, it was a rare, unfiltered demonstration of the principles their training was built upon. Back in the private room, the conversation between the three martial artists had shifted to the technical aspects of what had transpired on the mat. That counter to my front kick, Seagal acknowledged, professional respect temporarily overriding pride. The timing was something I failed at for years. Norris finished, the admission carrying no false modesty. My teacher in Korea made me practice that entry thousands of times before I got it right. Said timing can't be taught, only learned through repetition. Jason listened, witnessing something few ever saw: masters discussing craft without pretense, sharing the reality behind the polished surface presented to the world. The young ones today want shortcuts, Seagal observed, nodding toward Jason without hostility. YouTube tutorials, weekend seminars, quick certifications, they don't understand the years it takes. Some do, Norris countered, his gaze steady on the young fighter. The ones who feel it in their bones, the need to get it right. Not just look right. Jason straightened under the assessment, recognizing both the compliment and the challenge it contained. How did you stay real? He asked Norris, the question emerging from genuine curiosity rather than flattery. With all the fame, the movies, the Chuck Norris jokes, how did you not become the character instead of the man? Norris finished, understanding the unspoken comparison to Seagal. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I never stopped being a student first. Even at the height of the Walker Texas Ranger days, I trained every morning before set. Not for the camera. For me. Seagal nodded slowly, recognition in his expression. I stopped training for myself somewhere along the way. Started training for the image. The admission hung between them. Not an excuse, but an explanation that carried the weight of genuine self-reflection. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. The expo director peered in, expression anxious. "Gentlemen, the closing ceremony begins in 15 minutes. Given what happened earlier, we weren't sure if." Norris stood, decision made without hesitation. "We'll be there." Seagal looked up, surprise evident in his expression. After a moment's consideration, he nodded agreement, though uncertainty lingered in his eyes. As the director withdrew, relieved, Norris turned to Seagal. "One last lesson we can teach them," he said quietly. "How to move forward after a fall." The implication was clear, not just for Seagal personally, but for everyone who had witnessed his public stumble. How he handled this moment would speak as loudly as the confrontation itself. Seagal rose slowly, adjusting his gi, with hands that had regained their steadiness. "Always harder to get up than to stay up," he observed, the words carrying the weight of genuine experience rather than performed wisdom. "That's where the real training shows." Norris agreed. Together, the three martial artists moved toward the door. Representatives of different generations, different approaches, but united by their dedication to the discipline that had shaped their lives. As they walked through the back corridors toward the main stage, Seagal turned to Jason. "Your turn next," he said. The words carrying neither mockery nor condescension, but the simple recognition of martial arts' continuing legacy. "Do better than we did." The main arena had filled to capacity for the closing ceremony. Anticipation humming through the crowd. When Chuck Norris emerged from the side entrance, applause erupted, not the frenzied cheering of entertainment, but the deeper, more respectful acknowledgement of witnessing mastery. When Steven Seagal appeared beside him, the reaction faltered momentarily, then resumed, perhaps less enthusiastic, but carrying a new note of respect for his willingness to reappear after what had transpired. The expo director, clearly relieved by their presence, guided them to seats on the main platform. "We've, adjusted the program slightly," he informed them quietly. "Given the unique demonstration earlier." Norris nodded understanding, but Seagal raised a hand. "If you don't mind," he said, "I'd like to say a few words." The director's anxiety visibly increased, but he nodded agreement after a glance at Norris, who showed no concern. When the formal introductions concluded, Seagal rose and approached the microphone. The arena fell silent. Collective breath held in anticipation of what might follow his earlier provocations. Seagal stood before the microphone for a long moment, surveying the thousands of faces turned toward him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of its usual theatrical quality, just the straightforward tone of a man who had stepped outside his own performance. "Martial arts isn't about who can talk the loudest," he began. The words simple but carrying the weight of hard-earned recognition. "It's about who can back up their words when it matters. Today, I talked." Chuck showed. He paused, meeting Norris's gaze across the stage. "I think we all saw which approach carries more weight." The admission hung in the air, not dramatic, not self-flagellating, but honest, in a way that surprised those who had followed Seagal's career. This unscripted moment of vulnerability seemed more authentic than any of his carefully choreographed scenes. "That's the lesson I'm taking from today," he concluded. "Maybe you should too." As he returned to his seat, the applause began tentative at first, then building into genuine appreciation, not for his previous persona, but for this moment of unexpected authenticity. Chuck Norris rose next, his approach to the microphone carrying the same centered presence he had maintained throughout the day. When he spoke, his words were characteristically straightforward. 50 years in martial arts has taught me one thing above all else," he said, voice carrying easily without theatrics. "It's not about defeating others. It's about mastering yourself. He glanced at Seagal, including him in his next words. We all stumble on that path sometimes. The question is whether we learn from the fall. In the competitors section, Jason Chen leaned forward, absorbing every word. The posters on his bedroom wall, Norris in fighting stance, Seagal with enigmatic smile, would never look the same again. But they would remain, now representing not just icons to emulate, but a more complex understanding of the martial path, its challenges, and its true rewards. As the ceremony concluded and the expo began its final dispersal, conversations throughout the massive convention center carried variations of the same theme. They had come expecting entertainment, but had received education. They had witnessed not just a confrontation between celebrities, but a rare, unfiltered demonstration of martial arts' deepest principles. Outside the main entrance, as the Las Vegas evening settled around the departing crowds, Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal stood facing each other one final time. No cameras recorded this moment. No audience observed their exchange. Next time you want to test your skills, Norris said, the words carrying no rancor, come to my ranch. We can work out together, without the world watching. Seagal considered this, then nodded, the gesture carrying more genuine respect than any of his theatrical bows had conveyed. I might take you up on that. They did not shake hands or embrace. They simply acknowledged each other with the clear-eyed recognition of two men who had shared something significant, a moment of truth that had stripped away pretense and revealed what lay beneath. As they parted, moving towards separate vehicles, the lesson they had demonstrated lingered in the air between them. True strength needs no announcement. Real mastery speaks through action, not words. And the martial path is not about defeating others, but about the lifelong challenge of mastering oneself. In dojos and training halls around the world, that lesson would be discussed for years to come. A reminder that beneath the glamour, the movies, and the mythology, martial arts remains at its core what it has always been, a discipline of character revealed through action. The confrontation was over, but its impact had just begun. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.